Welcome everyone. My name is Justin Chugg, and today we're going to be talking about selling Office 365. The purpose of these calls, which we host every 2 weeks, is to help you be proactive when it comes to sales. And not just proactive, but also productive. Two areas which are hard to combine nowadays when it comes to selling. Typically, it's getting harder and harder. But what we're really trying to do is make this as easy as possible for you. And one of the reasons why we wanted to highlight Office 365 today is because it really is one of the more important products to be focusing on. One is because there's a high demand for it, so a lot of companies are going to be buying it anyways. And second, because when someone purchases Office 365, it tends to lead to other cloud computing products. And so eventually they end up buying voice, they end up buying cloud computing, disaster recovery, IT security, and anything else that Microsoft plans on launching in the future. And so this really creates a gateway. And in terms of lowering customer acquisition costs, if you can sell 5 or 6 products with a single purchase or sell, it certainly makes your life a lot easier, especially when there's such a high demand and migration to Office 365. And so that's one of the main reasons why Office 365 is so effective in terms of selling, is that it's a great door opener, and it leads to a lot of other product sales. What we found here at Ensabled is that Office 365 represents around 51% of the email market space. It's pretty large, and on a future call, we'll be focusing more on how to sell to existing Office 365 users, but for today, we're going to be focusing a lot on helping customers who have yet to adopt Office 365 and help them basically migrate to that. We've done some research, and one of the areas where you can focus a lot of your time are in markets where Office 365 has a much lower market share. Particularly, we found this is more common in the rural markets. For instance, customers who use Socket as their internet and voice provider tend to use Office 365 a lot less than the national average. Socket is a rural carrier. This is just one example, but there's a lot of different markets where Office 365 is still underserved. We've also found that companies that reside in buildings that are valued between 1 and 10 million are much less likely to use Office 365. Gmail in this case is actually a much higher percentage, and we believe that this is due to the fact that a lot of younger companies are residing in these buildings that are adopting Gmail. One of the reasons why we think that is because more established companies tend to use Office 365 more than anything else. In fact, that's the highest area of correlation is the revenue that companies have, where if a company has a $5 billion plus annual revenue, they have a 91% chance of using Office 365. And so this correlation is pretty strong, which is great for having conversations with clients, because if they are concerned about the legitimacy or the product itself, you can use this as an example to help establish credibility with Office 365. It's also interesting to find that restaurants are most likely to use Office 365. This was the industry that had the highest number of Office 365 users. I like to use these examples because when we're looking at this, it's really helpful if you're talking to anyone in the restaurant space that isn't using Office 365. It's pretty compelling to talk to them about switching over to it, because so many of their peers are already using it in this space, and it wouldn't be wise to be outside of this realm. And so if I was selling Office 365, I would be focusing on restaurants who are using anything but Office 365, and it would be pretty easy to convince them based on these stats. Also, we found that companies, which also correlates well with the larger organizations, companies with a budget of more than $1 billion in IT use Office 365 much higher than the national average. And I think that this goes to show how companies are investing their time. They're trying to stay away from managing internal infrastructure and trying to focus on more strategic projects. And so if you're having trouble with the IT guy who's hugging his servers, this is a great slide or example of what smart companies with large IT budgets are doing and where they're focusing their time. Before you talk to anybody, it's always helpful to know what type of email servers they're using. There's lots of great tools for this. These two are my favorites. MX Toolbox does a great job of giving you the MX records for a company, which you can look through. Sometimes it's hard to detect what the actual MX records indicate. So if you use the upsell report, it basically translates a lot of the data in those DNS records and website plugins into a nice compact list of technologies. And so you can run free reports from any of those two websites. Now let's go ahead and switch gears and talk a little bit more about appointment setting. This first half of the call, we've talked about where to focus our time in terms of which markets and which types of customers. But I'd like to talk a little bit about what I've seen across the market as far as the best practices go for selling Office 365. The first, which is my favorite, which is license optimization. And this is going to be a discussion we'll take to another call because it really deserves its own call to cover all of the material for this. But a lot of times folks will work with existing Office 365 users and help them optimize their Office 365 licenses, and then that opens up discussions to other cloud products. Another great strategy is to focus on companies who are experiencing an email outage. Email is used typically 4 times more than their voice services, and it's really the backbone of many companies. And so when these platforms go down, it's easy to have a conversation with them about switching over to something a little bit more reliable. To get data on which email service providers are going down, you can just go to downdetector.com and keep tabs on the different organizations and then basically bring that back to whoever's using that email platform. If you're using Ensable, we're going to be doing this for you. This will be provided for you within the Pareto report, but we'll be highlighting which of their vendors have experienced an outage and which of your customers or prospects are using those platforms. We've also found that there's still around 13% of the industry that are using private email servers. So that's a little bit more than 1 out of 10. This is much lower than companies who are using private servers in their closets. And so this is a good trend to focus on. So you'll find that I think in the next few years, this number will drop significantly. So focusing on companies with these private email servers will be much easier. Now, there isn't an easy way to identify who has a private email server. I believe Ensable is the only company that's figured it out so far. But if you need that list, we'd be more than happy to provide that for you. Another strategy that we've seen that works really well is to keep an eye on your spam folder. And this is a really painless one for your sales team. But keep track of legitimate emails that end up in your spam folder, and then forward that over to a decision maker and let them know that switching to Office 365 would make this problem disappear primarily. It doesn't fix all problems, but it would fix a lot of problems because Office 365 is one of the only email service providers that has a self-healing IP system to avoid getting blacklisted. And so working with companies who are emailing you, they're basically gaining a bad reputation or having issues with their email. Just forwarding this over to a decision maker would make your life a lot easier in terms of the sales process. You can also check to see if your customers are blacklisted. Just go to ensable.com/black and we'll be able to run a review of their email reputation to see how they're performing and to see whether or not they're getting stuck. And so you can check those for free at ensable.com/black. Another great resource is checking to see whether or not emails have been breached. Some of you who use Ensable may have seen this in some of your alerts. Basically, if you've been paying attention to the news, every major internet platform has been hacked at some point. And what happens is when these platforms are hacked, the hackers take all of this information in terms of passwords and user information and emails, and they make it available across the black web. And so when this happens, a lot of sensitive information is exposed, and usually the passwords that the individuals use for their email are used in other areas across the organization, and so this puts them at risk. And so switching email providers will help fix some of these issues, but you can check to see if your customer's email has been breached at entable.com/breach, and we'll run a free check for you to check across the web to see if that email has been compromised. Another strategy that we've seen that works really effective is focusing on customers of carriers who have a seamless Office 365 integration. So there's around 8 vendors that have a really strong Office 365 integration with their voice platform, starting with 8x8, Megapath, Telligent, Momentum, RingCentral, Evolve IP, Yiptel, and Vonage. I'm sure there's a few others that we've left off the list, but these are the ones that I've seen that have very strong Office 365 integration. And so if they're not using Office 365 and they're using these companies as their carriers, then there's a good chance that they're missing out on a big opportunity, and this makes it easy to have a conversation about that. Now, we've talked about a lot of different strategies, but really when it comes to selling Office 365, you want to stack the strategies to increase the likelihood of selling the opportunities. So you want to focus on those markets where there's either a really low market share of Office 365 users or a really high market share, and focus on the companies that have yet to adopt that service within that space. It's also helpful to focus on these, within those markets, to focus on companies who use specific types of carriers that have an integration with Office 365. And if you have relationships within those organizations or can establish those relationships via LinkedIn or whatever it may be, that would certainly make these conversations much easier. Also, if these companies are using private email servers, and if you're able to stack these 4 different attributes of your prospects, obviously this is going to be a lot easier when you're having conversations with them. But it's most effective if you can wait for certain events, because we found that selling Office 365 goes best with certain events, which we talked a little bit, but if your customer's email has been recently breached, if they're recently blacklisted or experience an outage, if they're experiencing rapid employee growth, which is very time-consuming for the IT manager to be adding and subtracting different employees to their current email services, which Office 365 helps optimize. Also, if you keep track of new Office 365 integrations, which is also a good event to be keeping an eye out for. So what happens here is a lot of these hosted voice companies, we listed 8 that have Office 365 integrations, but there are many others that are working on those integrations. And when those are launched, that type of event, which has a time element to it, certainly makes it a lot easier. So again, going back, you want to build a prospecting list that includes at least 3 or 4 of these attributes in terms of the right markets that have the right types of hosted voice platforms that can integrate with Office 365 and are not currently using Office 365 today. And then you want to wait for those types of events where there's some type of change taking place within their environment that would help you to open up a conversation with them about moving to Office 365. So that's everything we have for you today. 2 weeks from today on our next call, we'll be discussing email lists and best practices around this realm.